Hello, this video is about doing word studies. I wanted to go through a basic process that you can use to study a word or to study a phrase in the biblical text. This form that you're looking at gives you kind of a basic template that you could use to fill out to do a word study. The word I want to particularly look at today is the word for perfect, which I know is teleos. Now, you don't know that, and I'm talking about Greek, the Greek word for perfect, because of course there'd be a different word in the Old Testament. I'll tell you how I got that, if you don't know Greek, how you can come up with that in a second. But first of all, I want to show you kind of a sample of where we're going here. Here's a sample of a word study on the word nature in the New Testament, so in Greek. So the Greek word is phusis. You don't have to know the Greek letters. There's a transliteration of it. I know that it looks like a U, but in Greek, the letter upsilon is transliterated. That is, you bring it into English letters with a Y. Don't ask why. There are a lot of things in life where you just don't ask why. You just do what they say. Now, I used a target passage to do this word study, using Romans 2:14, because I know the word nature is there. Sometimes, why do you do a word study? A lot of times you do a word study because you're reading a scripture and you come to a verse that you don't know what the verse is saying. And maybe there's a key word that jumps out at you and you say, wow, if I knew what that word meant, then I would understand what this passage or this verse is saying. Or at least we think we'll move farther toward understanding it. So when I say a target passage, I mean a passage where that's kind of started your study. You read the verse, you thought, what does that word mean? And you said, well, I'll do a word study. Now, of course, if you have a good commentary, then probably some scholar's done the word study for you. And there are plenty of resources out there that claim to do word studies. Now, I think the overwhelming majority of popular word studies are probably bunk. In fact, and let me go even further, a lot of the scholarly word studies that are available, I think, are bunk. There's a famous 10-volume theological dictionary of the New Testament edited by Gerhard Kittel. For years, Kittel's dictionary was like the bomb. It's a bunch of bunk. It is riveted with what are called the overload fallacy and the etymological fallacy. These are fallacies that the etymological fallacy says that where a word comes from, or if you can break apart the component parts of a word, then you understand what the word means. That's a fallacy. It's as much of a fallacy as saying that the word understand means to stand under something. That's just not the way language works. It can make for good sermon illustrations, and I'm not saying not to do it as a sermon illustration, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't actually work in truth. There is no guarantee that what a word has meant in the past has anything at all to do with what it means right now in a sentence of contemporary usage. That's the etymological fallacy. The overload fallacy is when you read vast amounts of theology and doctrine into the instance of a word. No, theology is not in a word. A word can be part of an expression of theology, but theological systems cannot be, sucked into a single word. That's just not the way words work. A good example of this is the student that once wanted to do a word study on the word impossible in Hebrews 6, where it says it's impossible for God to lie. And I said, well, you could do a word study on the word impossible, but inevitably what you're going to find is that the word impossible means not possible. See, he was mistaking the theology of the verse for the meaning of the word. And that's kind of what the overload fallacy does. Kittel's dictionary is helpful in getting the historical background of certain words, but in terms of the actual way that Kittel thinks, it is riddled with the overload fallacy, where theology is shoved into words. And a whole generation, 2 generations of pastors have been ruined in the way that they use words because of the fallacies inherent in that 10-volume theological dictionary. Okay, this is a rant. Basically, I'm saying that you can do as well as many, many scholars simply by listening to the biblical text. And so you come across a word, you say, I want to do this word, I want to find out what this word means. So you get a starter definition. That's all you need. You're going to make the dictionary entry, so you just need kind of a starter definition to get you going. Like for this word phusis, the word nature is plenty good to get started in doing the word study. Now, if you have an infinite amount of time, and you usually don't, there might be related words that can help you. So, for example, to be arrogant might be related. Naturally, natural, pride. Now, here's the thing, though. And this goes back to some of the fallacies inherent in Kittel and fallacies inherent in the way that a lot of people use words. Words have often completely unrelated meanings. There is not just one core meaning that plays itself out every time a word is used. A word can mean completely different things in one context and then a completely different thing in another context. So there's no guarantee that the related words, there's no guarantee that they will have anything to do with what the word means. So, for example, if you look here, fuzi-o'o, or fuzi-a'o, depending on how you want to pronounce it, it is related historically to phusis, but it is completely unrelated in meaning by the time of the New Testament. You are not going to get any valid help in knowing what the word phusis means by looking up the historically related word fuzi-a'o. And so you have to be careful looking at potentially related verbs, so like looking at the noun form if you're studying the verb, or looking at the verb form if you're studying the noun, or looking at the adjective form of the noun. There's a little grammar review here. That might be helpful, but it might not be helpful at all because of the one meaning fallacy. It's a fallacy to think, and the lexical fallacy. The lexical fallacy thinks that there's some core meaning to a word that's played out every time it's used. That's the lexical fallacy. The one meaning fallacy is the idea that a word always means the same thing everywhere that it's used. So there are lots of very, very common fallacies. And unfortunately, like I said, the Kittel generation ruined like 2 complete generations of pastors in the way that they use words, to where they use words incorrectly and in fallacious ways. So potentially related words that are spelled similar or have the same historical root, that might be helpful, but it might not be. I'm not requiring you in this course to take other related words. That's icing on the cake. But to just do a word study on the word itself that you're doing a word study on. So the word phusis, nature, occurs 14 times. So number 5 here is, and this is the heart of a word study. The heart of a word or phrase study is looking up the instances where that word is used. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, even if you don't know Greek. So, for example, since I started with Romans 2, right here, I went to the rest of the instances of phusis in Romans to start off with. So it's used quite a bit in Romans, actually, isn't it? Most of the time, more in Romans than anywhere else, 126 to 14. And as you go through each one of these instances, I take notes to myself as to what the word seems to mean. You're not going to always be able to hone in on what the word means in every instance it happens, especially if it's in a list. Then you don't have any context to tell you what it means. But occasionally, as you go through the places in the New Testament where a word like nature is used, occasionally you'll have an aha moment, an instance where it is very clear what that word means in that context. And that's when you write down these definitions that the word can have. You start in rings because however inspiration works, God worked through the styles and vocabularies of individual authors. You can't assume that Matthew uses words the same way that Paul uses words, because it's quite clear if you get into the weeds that however inspiration worked, it worked through the personalities and vocabularies of individual authors. So if you're looking at Romans 2, and that's where you want to know what nature means in that verse, then you're going to start first by going at the rest of Romans, and then you'll look at the rest of Paul, and then you'll broaden to the rest of the New Testament. Now, if you had an infinite amount of time, you could go to the Greek Old Testament, because New Testament authors drew on the Greek Old Testament it can be helpful to look at instances of a word in the Greek Old Testament. Maybe that has influenced the way they use the word. And of course, if you had an infinite amount of time, there's actually a tool called the Thesaurus Lingua Graecae that goes through all the instances of the word nature, for example, in Greek literature from over 1000 BC to 500 AD. I'm making up those dates, but from Homer to the Byzantine era, you can find either Thesaurus Lingua Graecae, or TLG as it's called, will show you all the places where the word is used in all known Greek literature in that period. And if you have an infinite amount of time, you can go through each one of them and construct a really fine dictionary entry for this word. Now, mind you, before there was television, there were some very boring people who did this work for us. So if you buy Bauer, Arndt, Gingrich, Stenker, the big New Testament Greek dictionary, or Little Scott, the classical Greek dictionary, then you have people who basically have done that. How did they come up with those dictionaries? How did you come up with the New Testament Greek dictionary? How did they come up with the classical Greek dictionary? Because the dictionary wasn't invented until recent times. So how did scholars of the 1800s come up with those dictionaries? They just went through all the places, where those words were used in Greek literature, and they constructed a dictionary. We have them to thank. They've done us a wonderful service. I'm sure they walked into walls and fell down stairs. They were that kind of personality probably. But we're very grateful to have them around, or to have had them around, as they put these dictionaries together. A word study is basically where you're repeating their work and making sure that you agree with them, getting fresh eyes on the text and what it says. The goal of a word study is first of all, to come up with a dictionary entry. A dictionary is a popularity contest. When you get an English dictionary, the words are listed by popularity, and the number one definition of this word is, what is the number one definition? It's the way people, in whatever year that dictionary came out, it's the number one way that people were using words in the year that dictionary came out. Number two, and then of course eventually words fall out of meaning, words get removed from the dictionary, new words get added. The word Google was added. Facebook was added to the dictionary within the last 10 years. This is 2014 when this video is being made. Facebook's only been around 10 years, so the word Facebook, has only been in the dictionary for, 9, 8 years. I don't know how long it took it to get in the dictionary. So, after looking at all the instances in the New Testament where a word is used, then you create a dictionary entry. I ended up with 2 entries. Sometimes it means nature, and sometimes it seems to mean something more like kind. Now, if you started with a target passage, now maybe you didn't start with a particular verse. Maybe you just said, "Hey, I wonder what the word nature means in Greek." That can happen. And then if you're just doing a general word study, then it ends with your dictionary entry. But if you started with a specific verse, like this example did, then you're going to want to end by going back to that verse and saying, okay, this is how I think the word is being used in this particular verse. So there's the sample. Just to see, the idea of showing you the sample is to give you a sense of where we're going with this exercise. Now I want to do one. I want to do a word study, and I want to do it on the word perfect. Now let's say if I had just a general word study, I just wanted to know what the word perfect meant in general. Maybe the pastor or a pastor says something about being perfect from the pulpit, or in a conversation, or in a Bible study, or somewhere, on televangelist on TV, and I think to myself, I wonder what the Bible means by perfect. And of course, then I have to decide, do I mean what the Old Testament means by perfect? In which case I'm going to do a Hebrew word study. Or do I want to know what the New Testament means by the word perfect? So let's say the pastor quoted Matthew 5:48. And so, be perfect as your heavenly Father, as your Father in heaven is perfect. I thought, how can I be perfect like God is perfect? What does that mean? I want to do a word study on it. Now, let's say that you didn't know any passages. Let's say you just thought, I wonder what the Bible means by the word perfect. The tool I want to expose you to in this particular video is Blue Letter Bible, and If you've used it in the past, it had a different look. So this is the way it looks now. You just type in the URL, www.blueletterbible.org, and it'll bring you here. I'm going to go ahead, now that you can pick your version, I'm going to go ahead and pick, I'm just going to pick that, it's up at the top. Basically there are two Greek texts hidden in Blue Letter Bible. The default is the King James, and the other is the NASB. And so when you get to the Greek, no matter what other version, I pick RSV because it's right there at the top and easy to get to. I click the arrow and there it is. But basically, as you may know from this course or some other place, there are basically two options when it comes to what the original Greek of the New Testament said. There's the King James option and there's everything else. And so I'm going to pick RSV because that fits in the everything else category. As you know, the vast majority of those who've studied the manuscripts believe that the Greek behind modern versions is more likely to be original than the Greek behind the King James Version. For one thing, the manuscripts that we now have are hundreds and hundreds of years older than the manuscripts they had when they were putting together the King James. This is not important to life most of the time. Over 90% of the time it's going to read exactly the same, so it's not something to worry about. But let's say that I wanted to know what the word perfect meant, and I didn't know a reference. So you could just do a search, and then here, of course, again, word study on the Old Testament is going to be a different word. So you don't want to do any of these. You want to, okay, so there I would have found Matthew 5:48, the first place where the Greek word for perfect is used in the New Testament. Now, and I clicked on that verse. Now, you may wonder, well, why can't I just do a word study on an English word? Why can't I use an English concordance and look up all the places where the English word is used? Well, you can do that, and that actually, if you trust the translators, that's the thing, you have to trust the translators. That might even be better if you're doing a sermon on perfection, and you trust a certain translation, then you can go ahead and just do the English or the English. Now, don't do it for this if you're doing it for a course, though, because here's the thing. The same Greek or Hebrew word can be translated by different English words, and the same English word can be a translation of more than one original Greek or Hebrew word. Now, that may not seem clear, so let me give you an example. Take the word life. There will be places in the New Testament where the English word life is translating zoe, and like in zoology, and there will be other places in the New Testament where the English word life is translating the Greek psyche, which often means soul, or that's where the word psyche or psychology comes from. And so if you did an English word study on the word life, you would actually, in some instances, be looking at two different Greek words behind it without knowing it. That is, in the real Bible, the Bible that the biblical authors actually wrote in Greek, you would have different words behind the same English words. You wouldn't know that because you would just be looking at the English. Now, again, that's going to be fine because what's important, I think, is the message rather than the details to this level. But it's just to warn you that if you simply use the English word, you don't know how many different Greek or Hebrew words you're actually looking at. And so you're not going to pick up on the nuances quite possibly. In the same way, the same Greek word may have more than one nuance in English. And so if you want to do it properly, again, the other will do you just fine in terms of the message, but if you want to do it properly, you want to get back to the Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, some of the Old Testament's Aramaic, original in order to do the word study, if you want to do it proper. Okay, so how can I get to the Greek? I don't know Greek. Well, let's click on the verse here, and there it is. There's the verse in Greek. Now that may look like a bunch of gobbledygook. By the way, if you like the King James, it's at the bottom. This is the Greek behind the King James at the bottom. And then here's the Greek that most modern versions are based on. By the way, just for fun, let's see what the difference is. First word is the same, esisthe. Un is the same. Humes is the same. Teleoi, the same. Okay, modern versions have hos, and the King James has hosper. Guess what? They mean the same thing. Hosper is maybe a little bit more intensive, but not probably. They're pretty much synonyms. That's the same. That's the same. Okay, so the modern version says the heavenly Father, and this says the in the heavens Father. Okay, not a big difference. So you can see, this is just to demonstrate to you that even though there are some differences between the Greek text behind the King James and the Greek text behind modern versions, that it's a distinction without a difference. There's no difference in meaning between these two, even though there are some minor wording differences. Okay, but you don't have to know Greek to be able to do a word study. So we're trying to do a word study on the word perfect, right? Well, we know that so even if you can't read this, teleos, here is the word English, in English, perfect. So we know that that's what it is. Now let's say you want to know how that's pronounced. Well, there's a guy named Bill Mounts who's taken a lot of time to pronounce these for us. So let's hear what Bill has to say about how to pronounce this word.
Strong's G 5046. Teleos. Teleos.
Now, some people say teleos. Let's call the whole thing off. This is the Strong's number. Many of you will be acquainted with Strong's, the huge red concordance of the King James. Strong's was one of these boring people without TV I mentioned in the 1800s. He went through every word of the Hebrew Old Testament and the Aramaic parts of the Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. And every time he came to a new word, he numbered it, put it in alphabetical order, gave a definition for us. And so so this word teleos is the 5046th Greek word. The G stands for Greek, H stands for Hebrew. The 5046th Greek word in the list of Greek words that are in the New Testament. And so there you have it. Now, if I want to do a word study, what is my starter definition going to be? Well, I might just go with the word perfect, since that's what was in the translation of this word. So we're gonna do a word study on the word perfect. Now, how do I find out more about this Greek word? Well, I'm going to click on this, and there I have it. So now, again, if you want it pronounced, it'll pronounce it again. Oh, I wanted to mention to you that Greek and Hebrew are different from English. In English, there are some English words where the word gets kind of changed. So like if you take the word foot, F-O-O-T, if you make it plural, it becomes feet, F-E-E-T. There are some words like that in English, but most of the time, a word in English pretty much stays the same. You might add an S on the end, so hand, hands. You might add an S, but it's still pretty much hand. Greek and Hebrew are much different. The endings and the beginnings of Greek words get all mangled. I won't explain why. Take a Greek for Ministry course. But Greek and Hebrew words get all mangled. So what you're looking at here with teleos is not the way it's going to appear everywhere it appears in the New Testament. It's going to be sometimes teleoi, and it may be this, especially with verbs. Verbs get all kinds of mangled, and so this teleos form is just the dictionary, the way it looks in the dictionary. Actually, let's go back to the verse itself. Notice teleoi. Notice how it is. It looks different. That's not teleos. There's not an S on the end. There's an I on the end, or an iota instead of a sigma. So what I'm saying is, don't expect it to always look like this. It doesn't always look like that. It gets mangled in specific contexts. Okay, here's the root word, telos, which means end. Is that going to be helpful? Probably not. This whole Blue Letter Bible sequence here, the reason for Blue Letter Bible is so that you can find out what the word is, so that you can get a one-word or two-word starter definition, and especially so that here at the bottom of the page you know the places where the word teleos is actually used in the New Testament. This stuff up here is part of that gunk of 50 years of word fallacies. Generations of pastors messed up by Kittle. This is overload, wanting nothing necessary to completeness. I mean, that sounds so overloaded to me. The definition of a word, really, you should be able to substitute almost a one-word synonym for the word perfect or complete or something like that, mature. Don't think you're going to impress your professor by cutting and pasting lots of dictionary entries from here, there, and everywhere, because we want to know how it's used in these verses at the bottom. We want you to induce, using inductive reasoning, what these verses seem to be saying the word means. So even here, this is a classical. Thayer's is an old school overload fallacy dictionary. One word, perfect, will get you started with this word study. And again, the root fallacy or lexical fallacy, it doesn't matter what the root was. The root may have nothing to do with what this word means. Telos means goal or end, and it does turn out to be somewhat related, but you can't count on it. The fact that the word baptizo, to baptize, comes from bapto, to dip, doesn't mean that baptize always means to dip. That's the historical fallacy or the etymological fallacy. Words mean the way we use it. So what a word means today depends on how people are using words today. It can be completely different from what words have meant in the past. So if you want to know potentially related words, this root word, you could look at it, but far more helpful is to see these arrows, to take a peek at the next words in the dictionary. So teleotes, perfection, okay, that's related, see, perfection. So you could do a word study on this if you had an infinite amount of time, and it might be helpful. Let me keep going. Teleoo, or teleao, there's the verb form, to perfect or to complete. That would possibly be helpful. Can't count on it. In this case, it is helpful to do word studies on related words. Teleos, perfectly, completely. That would be, again, potentially helpful, although you can't count on it. Teleosis, another word for perfection. In this case, it's helpful, but you couldn't have counted on it being helpful. Teleotes, perfector, the person who perfects. In this case, it's relevant. You couldn't have counted on it being that way. And now this seems to be related as well. Telesphoreo, and now we're not really. This is not really related. This is historically related, but it's not. By the time of the New Testament, it's gone so far afield that basically we should stop here. Okay, so let me go back to the word we're actually interested in, which is teleos. You could, by the way, let's see if there's any on the other end. Nope. Artisan, carpenter, no. Okay, so here we are with teleos. So we have identified a word we want to do. We've found a verse that it's in. We've got a starter definition. Now, I've already mentioned here that if you really wanted to know what it meant in Matthew 5:48, you would start with the same book, where the word occurs in the same book. So let's now go to the bottom of this page, and it's used twice in Matthew. So I would go through each of these and jot down some notes. I actually think the context of Matthew 5:48 is very clear in what the word perfect means in that paragraph. Even though the word perfect just throws us off, because perfect in contemporary English means with no fault whatsoever. And so the idea that a human could be perfect that just isn't possible it isn't possible, but it messes us up. When I finish this word study, I'm going to go back to that paragraph in Matthew 5:48 and argue that in fact perfect is probably not a good translation for it anymore, because we we don't think of the word the way they thought of the word. Now, here, if you would be perfect, go sell what you have, give to the poor. That one could be helpful, but I'm not sure. If you, that would imply, because we really don't believe that the rich young ruler that Jesus is talking to, we don't actually think that he's going to be perfect, if he goes and sells all he has to give the poor. He probably, forgets his wife's anniversary, every once in a while, too. So he's probably not perfect. So even in 1921 of Matthew, that probably is not going to help us. We're going to keep going through these until we come up with a reference where we have an aha moment. So we start off with books, other instances of the word in the same book. Then we go to other instances of the word in the same author. Now, of course, Matthew, as far as we know, did not write anything else in the New Testament, so we don't have anything to do for same author. Same genre, so we could look at the other Gospels. Let's see. I don't think it doesn't appear in any other Gospels, so we'll keep moving. Same Testament. Okay, well, let's go look at other places in the New Testament where the word is used. Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world, be transformed, that you may prove the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. Not really enough context to help us hone in on what the word perfect means there, other than it's a good thing. Now, yet among the mature, here's an instance where the word perfect has been translated as mature. And so that's not an absolute perfection, is it? So let me go ahead. I'm going to create a dictionary entry. Let me go ahead and start a list. I'm still not sure that the word perfect is one I want to put down yet, but I'm going to put down mature as one of the potential meanings of this word. Now, 1 Corinthians 13:10. This is an aha moment to me, because the meaning of the word perfect really becomes clear to me here. At least one of the meanings. Love never ends. If there are prophecies, they will pass away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there's knowledge, it will pass away. Our knowledge is imperfect. Now, see, I don't like. Let me change the version here so that you can see. Let me go with the New International Version. We know in part. We prophesy in part. But when, and you may know this from the King James, when that which is perfect is come, what is in part disappears. The new NIV translation has even translated it as completeness. Do you see that the contrast between part and whole is in play here? And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put complete as one of the potential meanings of this word. Let's keep going. So, 1 Corinthians, do not be children in your thinking, but be perfect. Okay, there's that mature again as a meaning. Until we attain to the unity of the faith, to mature manhood. Again, you can see mature is common. Let those of us who are perfect be thus minded. Again, mature is the way that's usually translated. We are trying to present every man mature, every person mature in Christ. Epaphras greets you. He wants you to stand mature. Again, mature, if we had a different version up there, we would find, no doubt, let's go ahead and change to the NIV and see what happens. If these all are mature. Mature, actually, it's going with mature here too. Mature, solid food is for the mature. When Christ came through the greater and more perfect tabernacle. Okay, how are we going to go with perfect? Better? It almost means better there, doesn't it? More good, more complete. Now let's hold off on that one. Let perseverance, so that you may be mature and complete. Although I don't know, complete and mature. Again, they're in the ballpark. Now, when you get to James 3, this one here, we all stumble in many ways. Anybody who is never at fault is perfect. That one, this really, I think James 3:2 is maybe the only place in the entire New Testament where the English word perfect, as we now use it, is actually a good translation of the word. The rest, I think, are kind of a toss-up between mature and complete. I'm going to leave mature first because most of the translation instances we saw had mature. Okay, what is my conclusion? Go back to Matthew 5:48. What is my conclusion as to what Matthew 5:48 means? Well, let's look at the context and see. We've got three definitions: mature, complete, and perfect. So let's see what the context seems to say. So, you have heard it was said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray. So that sounds like, I'll just cut to the end. After thinking about this, it sounds a lot like complete. I'm telling you not just to love your neighbors, but to be complete and love your enemies as well. Don't just love your neighbor, but love your enemies as well. And God does this too. God doesn't just give the sun to the good, but God gives the sun to the evil as well. He does. It's not an eternal night for those who are evil, but God gives the sun both to good people and to bad people. God gives rain, which in a Palestine, in a world with drought and farming world, rain is a good thing. God doesn't just give rain to the righteous, but God gives rain to the unrighteous as well. If you only love those who love you, what reward will you have? If you only greet your own people, what honor is in that? But be complete, like your Father in heaven is complete. Go the whole way. Love not just your friends, but your enemies as well. And so I'm going to conclude this word study by basically saying that it means complete, or go the whole way, something along those lines in Matthew 5:48. So there you have it, how to do a word study using Blue Letter Bible. There are, of course, other resources that you could use. You could use Logos software or BibleWorks software, or there are plenty of eSword. There are plenty of other softwares out there to find where interlinearbible.org. There are plenty of places to find these resources. Blue Letter Bible seems right now to me to be the easiest to do word studies in Greek and Hebrew without having the software and without knowing much Greek or Hebrew. So, if we'd have had a infinite amount of time, we might have looked at the Old Testament Greek, or we might have looked at the rest of Greek literature at the time. We might have looked at other words, we like perfection, to perfect, related words, and see whether they're relevant. But this gives you some idea of how to do a quick and dirty word study. You can do this, sitting in bed because you can't go to sleep, and do a quick word study on, a word in 10 minutes. It doesn't take much time once you get the knack of it. Thank you. This has been How to Do a Word Study Using Blue Letter Bible.